Excellent.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's good.
And do we just pretend you're not there almost? Is that a bit
Yeah,
more? So,
completely.
yeah.
None of this is here. You literally just sat.
Okay.
Having a
So you're not on the interview.
like people do.
So what is Legionella?
Legionella is a waterborne bacteria that can be found in natural environments such as lakes and reservoirs.
Okay. And so how does it spread?
It spreads through aerosol, so it can live in its own environment and has done for, hundreds and thousands of years. The problem is when it gets into our building water systems, and it's contracted by aerosol, so things like showers, any sort of spray effects.
So how does it get into our buildings, sort of through?
It can live in, it comes through in small concentrations in mains water, and once we give it an environment where you have temperature, a good incubation period of temperature, stagnation in the water system, unclean systems, lots of different things basically that can make the problem.
So does it need sort of a certain temperature to then spread and
grow?
Yeah,
primarily it's all about temperature control. There's other factors like I mentioned about unclean water systems, but temperature is a big problem. Between 20 and 45 degrees are a perfect breeding ground for the bacteria. So anything under that temperature, it's dormant, so it's not dead, but it's just inactive. And then generally higher 45 upwards, it'll start to die.
Right.
So what we're trying to avoid is 20 to 45 degrees.
Right. Okay. And so is there? How do you sort of prevent it happening? Is there checks that need to be done?
Well, one of the main things in the natural environment, you're rarely going to be higher than a temperature of 20 degrees, so it doesn't cause any problems.
Right.
The problem is in a building, we give it an environment like a hotel. It's nice and warm. Water systems sometimes aren't used as much, so there's a stagnation risk. We give it a place where it can multiply rapidly. So you have to. What the importance then is to make sure you've got control measures to make sure the multiplication doesn't happen.
And the control measures, is that someone going in, testing the system, the temperatures?
Yeah, so you've, ultimately, if we go back to temperature control, because even if you've got a dirty water tank, dead leg pipe work, all these other scenarios, ultimately high temperature will kill the bacteria. So going back to temperature control is always really, really important. So managing your water systems is really, really important, and keeping good record keeping of them.
Okay, so if you went out to a building and you found Legionella there, what would you do? Is it just a case of managing the temperatures, or is there something you need to do to sort of kill it? Or?
Well, there's obviously a lot of contractors out there, some good, some bad, and ultimately you need to find out why. It's not just a case of, there's more remediation works needed. You've got to get to the problem of, it's the driver, not the car as well. So just because you have a high-risk building, if it's full of young people, the susceptibility of those young people is a lot lower than, for instance, an end-of-life care home. So, it's important where you look at the who's in the building. And for instance, if a building was once risk assessed and it had young people in and now it's sent to a care home, that risk has now changed. So there's loads of different, factors.
So sort of more elderly people are...
Yeah, definitely. So healthcare environments, whether it's a hospital and a nursing home, they're higher risk areas than, for instance, a school.
Yeah. Okay.
A little bit like COVID, where susceptible people, so the older people or people who have immune deficiencies, where they might have cancer treatment, even if they're young, so their immune system will be lower. So they're higher risk of contracting Legionnaires.
Right. And what buildings need Legionnaire testing?
Everything really. We all have. All systems have hot and cold water systems. Hot and cold water, you've all boilers and cold water, and then you've got the other private properties, houses and everything. There's no kind of legislation for those.
Right.
So ultimately it's commercial properties
Okay.
that are the main focus.
Yeah.
And the legislation's built around that.
Perfect. So sort of all commercial buildings should have a Legionnaire. How
You should have-
often?
You
should
need
they
control
have them?
measures in place.
Right.
So that the first port of call is to have a risk assessment done. If you
Yeah.
don't risk assess a building, what do you know what's there? You need a good risk assessment that identifies what systems are in there, and then from that you need to implement a control scheme
Right.
to make sure you're controlling those risks.
And then it can't spread. So it's mainly like temperature
Well,
where it
yeah,
spreads.
the like I said, the environments you can have. You need to. That's why temperature control is so important, and the checks, because it might be okay 1 month doesn't mean it'll be okay the next if the temperature control.
So
right.
how regular should the
You need to be
be?
doing your monthly checks.
Yeah.
In line with HSG 274 Part 2 on the domestic side, and if there's any unused outlets, so if you've got redundant areas where, for instance, a care home where rooms might be vacant, anything over a
Yeah.
month, you need to be doing weekly flushing.
Right. Okay.
At least weekly flushing, really,
Yeah.
and records kept of those.
Perfect. So the checks that we need to do, can they be done sort of by myself, or do I need to get an approved contractor
No,
in?
you
or-
can. I think there's a lot of overselling or misconception that you need assistance all the time, and ultimately, Legionella control isn't rocket science. It's quite a factual, service really, where if you're competent and you know what you're doing, there's no reason why you can't use an in-house team to do that. What is important that you complete what the legislation is asking you to do.
Yeah.
So as long as you're competent, they're trained, any sort of high turnover of staff, just make sure they are trained correctly.
Yeah.
And
And is it just a case of taking the temperatures of the?
Well, there's different checks. There's the monthly checks, which will be a sentinel, nearest and furthest, and then a percentage of your other taps. But then there's shower cleaning on a quarterly basis, tank inspections on you, and there's various checks. So you might end up finding, depending again on the system. Some systems are very, very simple and very basic. You might only have 5 taps in a little building somewhere, and then you might have something as big as a care home kind of thing. So the approach is always different depending on the building. So you might want to call in resources from a contractor, either all the time, or whether you have a split responsibilities. They come in 4 times a year, you do six of the months, and then you're left with another 6 months, whichever. So there's different ways of approaching that. But if you've got a good in-house team, a good technical support in-house, there's no reason why a lot of that can't be delivered by your own team.
So when the checks are done, if it's if the temperature is sort of too low or too high, then do I need to get a contractor in to come and have a look why?
Well, that's the most important thing, and this is where there's a misconception, and again, there's issues on the contracting side as well. The important bit is what you do with that information.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, when you're doing the checks, whether the checks are right or wrong, you are the auditor, the person doing the checks. It's what you do with that information and making sure, especially if there's areas of concern, that they're acted upon.
Yeah.
You don't want to be filling a logbook in, putting it on a shelf,
Just leaving
and
it,
then leaving it. So what's important is what you do with that there. So the benefit of using a contractor is at least they come in, they do their visit, and then they pass it back to the customer for them to do the corrections. If you do it in-house, it's making sure that information's fed in correctly, it's auditable, it's traceable. If it's inspected, it needs to be, you've raised this is what we've done about it. So there's a good audit trail all the way through. So there's more things to consider, but there's no reason why a good organised system, in-house system, couldn't work.
Okay, perfect.
And you can always call upon a contractor or a specialist to help you along that side or do some training with you.
Yeah.
But what you need to remember as well, it's not a one-off. Legionnaire disease isn't going away. If anything, it'll probably become more and more regulated. So, all businesses, all premises need to bear in mind that this is you need to make sure there's a budget there and you invest long term, really.
Yeah, okay.
With this in mind.
And the risk assessment, is that something that's just sort of done on a one-off, or do you need to sort of update this every year or every 2 years?
If the building hasn't changed and the risks haven't, so that, again, if the people in the use of the building hasn't changed, there's no reason to revisit that risk assessment.
Right.
You need to review it, make sure the control system's working, which should be an annual review, over and above the checks that you need to do. But there's no reason to revisit a document and spend money doing the same thing over and over again. That might be contractor led again, but ultimately it's your responsibility. The contractor is employed by you, so ultimately the risks are with you. So you are employing the contractor. So you might feel sometimes contractors try and lead on you need this, you need that, but ultimately it's your decision.
Right. Okay.
If there's an issue there, they'll be coming back. You employ the contractor, whether that contractor is competent or not competent. It's the ownership's on you, really.
Right. Okay. Perfect. So, what is Legionnaire's disease?
Legionnaire's disease is a form of pneumonia, severe form of pneumonia. It has an incubation period of 2 to 10 days, so you generally become unwell during that period. So over the years, probably from the early days when we knew about Legionnaire's disease, it was misdiagnosed, very much like flu, dry cough, headaches, those sort of symptoms really. So people had become unwell, in the early days, probably being able to work and then deteriorate. And even up to probably a couple of decades ago, really, people would die of a pneumonia, and even probably still do now, where they've actually died of Legionnaires. Right.
So it is deadly. Is it sort of deadly?
In a young person, you'll obviously, you probably, you could pass it off and be okay. But if your immune system's low, you've got contributing factors with age, poor health. If you're a smoker, it can be fatal. Yeah, right, it has it changes, but mortality rate is probably between 10 and 20% in the UK.
Right. Okay.
And then in healthcare premises, so it can be up to 50%.
Right.
So if you contract it in a healthcare environment, and obviously the people in there, the susceptibility of the people, is a lot higher. So obviously the percentage is a lot higher in there.
Okay. So if I've recently done some water sampling and it comes back positive of Legionella, do I need to panic about this? What do I need to do?
I think one of the problems is people do panic. The media love Legionnaires, and as soon as there's an issue, it's all over the press. And there is a lot of over panicking. First of all, where's that sample been taken from? Is there an aerosol associated with, is it feeding some showers? And then who again is in the building?
Yeah, okay.
I've been in the industry 15 years now, and the amount of panic and knock-on effect with buildings being closed and businesses being shut down is you need to understand first of all where it is and how you manage it from there, because it might be that you don't need to go to the extreme measures depending on where it is. And at the same time, make sure you're dealing with, if you are dealing with a contractor or a specialist, independence is really important, because obviously where revenues are present, you might find that contractors will lean more on a lot more financial spend.
Right. Okay.
First of all, if I reviewed a building with lots and that had some sampling done and there was a lot of positives, I wouldn't be looking at changing all the water systems and taking redundant pipework out first. I'd be looking at temperature control. So if in doubt, go back to temperature control, because the facts are Under 20 degrees, the bacteria is dormant, so it can't be a problem. And then from 60 degrees onwards, it's got a kill rate of 2 minutes, and then the higher the temperature, an instant kill rate. So if in doubt, always go back to temperature control. So if you've got positive results, where I've seen before where contractors will go in and say, you need to take this out, this needs to be done, but they're not getting to the problem. What is the temperature of that boiler?
Okay. So
if you're operating water at 40 odd degrees around the building, and there's positively, the first thing you need to do is get on top of the temperature control.
Perfect. So it's not always sort of like major works needed.
No, and again, it depends on who's in the building. So there is, throughout the country with, where you've got contractors advising who have a financial interest in those works.
Yeah.
I'd hazard a guess that there is a lot of excess spending.
Yeah. Okay.
Throughout the country. So again, look at things in isolation. Don't panic.
Yeah.
First of all, where is the sample being taken from? If it's taken from a little bib tap outside in the garden, well, there's no reason to shut the whole building down.
Yeah.
If it's an end-of-life care home and you've got numerous samples from showers and baths and that kind of thing, it needs to be looked at a lot more quicker and seriously, and more investigation needs to be done on that water system, and then maybe extra measures implemented straight away. So again, it's not a one size fits all.
Yeah. Okay.
So you need the right people around you, whether it's contractors or consultants. The industry is moving a lot more to an independent place where people offering risk assessment services have no financial interest in remedial works and that kind of thing.
Okay.
Whereas over the years, the way it's gone is risk assessments have become, commoditised like any commercial sector. But there's a big interest in the remedial works, so the risk assessments are sold cheaper
to then try and get
remedial works. So the industry is definitely becoming a lot more independent. So there's risk assessments are, for me, the most important service that you do straight away, because without the risk assessment, everything else is wrong. If you miss things on the risk assessment, how can you control measure? Be up to date if systems are missed or remedial works are missed.
Yeah, and the risk assessment needs to be done by a contractor.
A competent person, really. So ideally, you need someone experienced and good, and so you really want to be looking at CVs, experienced people who've been in the industry a long time, not just the contractor themselves, really.
Okay. And presumably sort of older water systems are more at risk than the sort of newer ones.
Again, but don't forget, going back to the driver, not the car. I would rather have a high risk system and a lot of young people in it than a medium risk system with a lot of elderly and frail people in the building.
Right, okay.
Where risk assessments are incorrectly done, in my opinion, people say this building's high risk, but there's a lot more factors. Who's in the building first of all.
Okay.
So just because a building's water system is really old and decrepit and it needs ultimately changing, I want to know who's in the building. Right. And I think that's where a lot of risk assessments and risk assessors in the industry are not experienced enough to go into that sort of level of detail. And that's the sort of level of detail you definitely need in the healthcare sector, because that's ultimately where the risks are a lot higher.
Okay. So how important is the control scheme?
Very important. And I saw a graph not so long ago, actually, where the HSE have identified areas of failure from issues from poor risk assessments through to poor training, and control schemes are a major factor of people either not doing enough, not doing what they should be doing, or holes within that control scheme. They do the showers, but they're not cleaning the tanks. They're not inspecting they're not cleaning the showers. And basically, it's like anything in life. It's all fine till it goes wrong.
Yeah.
And that's when it's looked at. So the control scheme is really important. Just because you've inspected a boiler last month doesn't mean it's okay. Now it's like a risk assessment is a snapshot in time. It doesn't mean it stays like that.
Yeah.
For months and months and years. So regular review, regular maintenance is so important that it's kept on top of.
Okay. So when we're taking the water samples, how important is it that all the records are really up to date? Do they need to be completely up to date?
If you choose if you choose to do water sampling, there's nothing specific where you have to do water sampling. Some people choose to do it. Some people, again, it's your decision as a customer.
Okay.
But and rightly so, you might undertake some water samples because you've got a concerned area or you feel better doing them.
And
but
should that
again,
always be recorded and written down?
Yeah, and more important as well, if there is an issue, you need to make sure you close, you get to the bottom of what it was. And again, it's all auditable. Because if that ever rises, an issue becomes apparent again, the HSE will be looking through your records. And you must keep your records for a minimum of 5 years.
Okay.
If there is an issue in an area, they'll be looking for a trend all the way back. So year on year, don't be archiving records where they can't be found. Obviously, web-based logbooks are becoming a lot more popular than the hard copy logbooks. Obviously, as technology moves on. A good control scheme, make sure you're dead clear on the expectations of HSG 274 Part 2 for domestic systems, and make sure you're fulfilling those. If you're using a contractor and they're doing part of the work and you're doing some, you've got a good in-house team, make sure you've got a clear split responsibilities. Who's doing what? So no one, there's you're assuming the contractor's doing this and you're doing this, and then something goes wrong and then we thought you were doing this. You should have a clear split responsibilities and both parties to sign it.
Okay.
And ultimately, again, without going over the same thing, it's your responsibility as a customer. You're employing the contractor to help you manage that risk.
But okay.
So where people are misguided, they'll be thinking, well, give it to the contractor, then it's their problem. It's not.
Yeah.
You're employing them to help you get to where you're trying to get to.
So regular maintenance is the sort of main...
Yes. Keeping on top of your control scheme, your inspections, your shower head cleaning, including the hoses and the parts associated with it. It's imperative that the checks are done and the records are kept properly.
Okay.
The amount of audits I've done over the years where people are saying, we're doing the weekly flushing, we'll do it, and can I have a look at the records? Oh, I don't keep a record. But Mary does it, but Mary's been off for 6 months. That kind of thing where really robust record keeping is really, really important.